Welcome to this virtual meeting of the Scottish Parliament. And the first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions, rural economy and tourism. I'd like to get everyone in, please, so short and succinct questions and answers, particularly when it comes to the supplementaries, please. And question number one is Alistair Allen.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment has been made of the likely impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on rural and island economies.
Fergus Ewing.
The Presiding Officer, the impacts of COVID-19 on the Western Isles have been very substantial, and in particular on tourism in those islands have been devastating, and the Scottish Government is working extremely hard to address all of these matters.
Alistair Allen.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his response. There is an obvious concern that the economic impact of the pandemic will exacerbate long-standing trends around island depopulation. Recession tends to result in working-age families moving to the mainland in search of work, and if this happens, we could take a long time to recover demographically. So can the Cabinet Secretary say anything more about committing to ensure that an assessment of this issue is made and that all interventions will be considered?
Fergus Ewing.
Yes, I can. I hope, Presiding Officer, that Dr. Allen's constituents will feel that this government is a friend to them and to the islands with the introduction of road equivalent tariff, with such policies as delivery of 1,000 homes under the Croft Grant scheme, many of which have been built in his constituency. And our concern is that the impacts on population pre-COVID were expected to lead to a 20% decline in population by 2041. So there's now an even greater need to consider these matters, and a population task force has been established to do just that.
Short supplementary, please, from Rachel Hamilton.
Cabinet Secretary, can I ask what discussions there have been about moving self-catering businesses into phase 2 of easing lockdown, and what action the Scottish Government has taken to ensure that grant funding is now reaching those self-catering businesses after their initial exclusion?
Self-catering businesses were not excluded. However, we did make more generous the initial package in response to listening very carefully to people such as Fiona Campbell representing that group in the tourism sector. Also, yesterday I covered this issue in great length, actually, and answered this question several times. But let me just repeat it now. We believe that all accommodation should be reopened for business in phase 3 and with an indicative date, subject to the science being with us and the virus being tackled, of the 15th of July. And whilst I absolutely agree that self-catering and fixed static units in caravan parks, for example, as well as second homes, provide a relatively safe method of enjoying a holiday compared with other types of accommodation provided, the key issue is general travel. General travel can only go ahead in phase 3, not in phase 2. I gave that answer, I think, on at least 4 occasions yesterday, and I repeat it now.
Question number 2, David Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment is made of COVID-19 in the Highlands and Islands.
Fergus Ewing.
The Scottish Government is keenly aware of the impact that the virus has had on the tourism economy of the Highlands and Islands and working extremely hard to address them.
David Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Tourism is the lifeblood of the economy within the Highlands and Islands, but my mailbox is full of disgruntled tourist businesses who've been denied business interruption insurance due to COVID-19 for a variety of spurious reasons. And the Cabinet Secretary join my campaign to raise the injustice with the regulator and ask insurance companies to think again.
Fergus Ewing.
Well, I entirely agree with David Stewart that the response of the insurance companies has been deeply disappointing. And that's why the Scottish Government has been very active on this matter. And in fact, myself and Fiona Hislop, the lead Cabinet Secretary in this matter, had a conference call with the Association of British Insurers just last week, where I expressed my extreme displeasure at the fact that so many insurance companies seem to be denying liability on the basis that this pandemic is the wrong sort of pandemic. How truly pathetic. So, yes, we are campaigning on this, and yes, we will work alongside David Stewart. And may I say, Presiding Officer, the first occasion since Mr. Stewart has announced his planned retiral, how much of a pleasure it has been and will be continuing to work alongside him in representing people in the Highlands of Scotland.
Short supplementary, please.
Can the Tourism Secretary advise what consultation is planned with island authorities and communities around the lifting of restrictions on ferry and air travel ahead of that possible opening of the tourism market from the 15th of July?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, I thank Mr. MacArthur for his question. It's ferry travel, of course, is never more important than now. And my colleagues Paul Wheelhouse and Michael Matheson, who are in the lead in this, are in regular contact with the islands authorities, as indeed am I, to work together to make sure that both for residents and for visitors to Orkney, a premier tourism destination, as I know from a recent holiday my family have had there, will continue to be paramount.
Question number 3, Beatrice Wishart.
So to ask the Scottish Government how it is supporting Shetland's rural economy.
Fergus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, we recognise the particular challenges facing Shetland at the moment, and we have acted quickly to deliver over £2,300 million of support in Scottish businesses through rates relief and grant support, £22 million in support to seafood, fishing and aquaculture, so important to Beatrice Wishart's constituents, and I believe £7 million approximately in grant finance for the rates relief scheme.
Beatrice Wishart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer. At the Culture and Tourism Committee on 14th May, the Cabinet Secretary recognised that Shetland and other islands have a shorter tourist season than those on mainland Scotland. Some in the hospitality sector have likened the prospect of any recovery from COVID as having to first survive 3 winters. To ensure that there is a sector left to restart, will the Government consider a 12-month bespoke support package for the islands to help the visitor economy get through to Easter 2021?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, I have a great deal of sympathy with the general argument that is made, and is made also by, I think, MSPs representing all the other island groups in Scotland, namely the shortage of the short period duration of the season, Presiding Officer. And just this week, in fact, I put this point again to the UK Tourism Minister, Nigel Huddleston, and I argued that this should be considered very seriously, because these businesses need a bit of help to see them through to March next year when the next season begins. But I do hope that, following my announcement yesterday, it will be possible for accommodation providers in Ms Wishart's constituency to retrieve something from this summer season.
Question number 4, Bill Kidd.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government, in light of the potential impact on rural communities, what its response is to people travelling cross-border to holiday in Scotland's beauty spots during the lockdown period.
Fergus Ewing.
Well, of course, our good friends from south of the border are always welcome to Scotland, but of course at this particular time, the guidance for everyone, irrespective of borders, is to travel locally only, and to travel no more than around 5 miles for leisure or exercise, Presiding Officer, no matter where they're located and no matter where the border may be.
Thank you. Thank the Cabinet Secretary for his response there. Because of the change in the approach to easing of lockdown between Scotland, England and the other nations in the UK, I'd be obliged if the Minister could advise what communications have taken place between the devolved governments and the UK Government to help to address this issue?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, I'm pleased that we do work very closely together. I mentioned Nigel Huddleston, the UK Tourism Minister, and also David Ellis-Thomas, the Welsh Tourism Minister, and our colleagues from Northern Ireland meet every fortnight. We've had numerous discussions, and the question of travel between these countries, these nations, has been talked about frequently. And we all very much agree that following the lifting of the restrictions, that people from all over the UK will be able to enjoy a holiday in Scotland, just as we expect that people in Scotland will enjoy the opportunity to holiday in other parts of the UK.
Question number 5, Alexander Burnett.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and noting members to my register of interest related to tourism. Can I ask the Scottish Government, in light of the income that is expected to be lost in 2020, what support it plans to offer the tourism sector until April 2021?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, we are providing £2,300 million of support, including £900 million of non-domestic rates relief, £1.3 billion in business grant schemes, £185 million targeted at small businesses and the newly self-employed. We've provided a bespoke scheme in the Pivotal Enterprise Resilience and the Creative Tourism and Hospitality Enterprise Hardship Fund. Additionally, we've announced that £3 million will go to B&Bs without business bank accounts, providing them with a vital lifeline. And finally, Presiding Officer, I'm in continuous dialogue with the UK Government, Nigel Huddleston, about further support that I believe will be required to help tourism get to the other side of this dreadful period.
Alexander Burnett.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer? That's obviously helped a lot of businesses. However, I previously raised questions on behalf of constituents with businesses renting out marquees, providing mobile catering and portable toilets with no satisfactory answers. This group within the tourism and hospitality sector is receiving no support whatsoever due to various anomalies. So given that they are now looking at no income until summer 2021 at the earliest, can I ask again what specific support the Cabinet Secretary will give today to help these businesses survive?
Fergus Ewing.
If the member wishes to raise any individual case with me in his area, then of course I will look at those specific. May I just say, though, that the reason we've set up the bespoke funds, the Pivotal and the Creative Tourism Hardship, was precisely because that many businesses missed out from qualifying from the initial grant fund based on premises which were classified as tourism, hospitality or leisure businesses on the rateable valuation roll. That's why we did that in Scotland, and I'm bound to point out, Presiding Officer, that in fact in the case of the Pivotal Fund there is, as I understand it, no equivalent in England. So we have actually gone further for Mr Burnett and his constituents than his own party have in England. I think that's something that he might welcome.
Short supplementary, please, from Colin Smith.
Thank you, President Officer. The current criteria for property-related grants to many tourism businesses has a cut-off rateable value of £51,000, and most aren't eligible for the Pivotal Enterprise Grant Scheme. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, will the Government look at extending support to those businesses above that £51,000 rateable threshold?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, as Mr Smith himself recognises, the Pivotal Fund has been a source of potential grant finance to many businesses whose rateable value is in excess of £51,000. So that is a bespoke fund and it is available. Not all businesses qualify, though there are rules, there have to be rules, and I'm very sorry that we can't support every business, but that is the reality. But I do know that in his part of Scotland, many businesses have qualified. I don't think I should mention individual cases, although I could. The last point I make, Presiding Officer, is that I've raised, I think on several occasions, including in writing with Nigel Huddleston, the case for a UK-wide approach, which would extend the support beyond 51,000. The Scottish Chambers of Commerce have as well. This has been rebuffed. The Treasury have said no. I think that's mistaken, and I think it should be reviewed. And if it were reviewed, any additional finance would, I believe, be actually a good investment for the future by helping those businesses survive and thereby generate more taxes and contribute more to their communities in future years to come, rather than risk the possibility of failing to survive this crisis.
Question number 6, Keith Brown.
To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it's had with the coach industry regarding support during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Fergus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, I've had detailed discussions with the CPT, which I believe represents around about 100 of the 300 coach companies involved in tourism, and I know just how important they are. We've seen, sadly, the loss of Shearings, which is a hugely successful coach tour business, which itself provided business to many hotels throughout, for example, the West Highlands. I have suggested that the UK government should have a bespoke scheme for the coach sector, and thus far we haven't had a reply, but we are continuing to press those representations with our UK government counterparts.
Keith Brown.
I very much welcome the announcement made by the Cabinet Secretary of a provisional start date of 15th July, provided, of course, that there are appropriate safety guidelines being followed. But I've had inquiries regarding the impact that social distancing will have on the sector when it's safe enough to resume business. Will developing safety guidelines in consultation with the coach sector form part of the work of the Scottish Recovery Tourism Task Force?
Fergus Ewing.
Yes, I expect that they will want to consider that, because coaches are a vital part of our tourism sector in taking people to and from hotels, beauty spots, visitor attractions, cities, cruise liners, and they do so in very high quality coaches as well. So I think it's essential that we do consider how we can help them survive this period. They have considerable fixed costs, Presiding Officer, and like everything else, this isn't an easy area. But I do very much hope that the UK government will take this very seriously indeed, and that the detailed representations that we've made will be supported by Her Majesty's Treasury with some funding for this part of the tourism sector.
Question number 7, Ruth Maguire.
Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government, in light of the impact on rural businesses, what engagement it had with equestrian governing bodies to inform the phased return to activity.
Marie Goujon.
The Scottish Government recognises the many benefits that equestrianism delivers for Scotland, including the economic benefits, and the important contribution made by the many workers and volunteers. And Horse Scotland is a key member of the COVID-19 response group, which has been set up by Sport Scotland to consider the conditions that would be required for a safe return for outdoor sports. And of course, horse riding coaching is now permitted if it is outdoors, though of course some restrictions that come along with that.
Ruth Maguire.
Thank the Minister for that answer. I'd like to speak to her on behalf of Fergus Hill Riding Stables in my constituency about the one household a day rule. Obviously, coaching takes place in an outdoor setting, and they tell me that one-to-one sessions staggered throughout the day using different horses with their own tack means that they could go ahead with no compromise to physical distancing, no cross-contamination from coach to pupil or pupil to horse. I know the Minister recognises the positive mental and physical health benefits. Will they reconsider the one household a day rule to enable this business to continue to be viable?
If you could be quick, please, Marie Goujon.
Okay, I'll try. No, I do completely understand the concerns that Ruth Maguire's outlined there, but of course public health is one of the key concerns here. So I mean, as a just of May 2020, one-to-one teaching is permitted outdoors, but of course there has to be physical distancing, and that is allowed to take place with members of that household as well as members of one other household. And Horse Scotland have recently published guidance for phase 1 of Scotland's route map, and that can be found on their website, and I'd be happy to send those details on to Ruth Maguire if she would find that helpful. Now, and that guidance includes specific advice for riding schools, livery yards, outdoor facilities, coaches, participants, And of course, that activity has to be consistent with current guidance on health, physical distancing and hygiene. But of course, we will be continuing to engage with the sector to ensure that as soon as it's safe for them to operate more on what would have been a more normal basis, we want to see that happen. But of course, it's public health that's the overriding concern here, and we need to make sure that we get that right.
Question number 8, Angus MacDonald.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what progress has been made regarding plans to support B&Bs that are not on the rate system and were not eligible to apply to the COVID-19 hardship scheme solely because they did not have a business bank account.
Fergus Ewing.
Well, we are providing considerable financial support to the tourism sector, Presiding Officer, and that includes bed and breakfast businesses that do not have a business bank account, and for that reason who were not previously eligible for support. £3 million has been made available from repurposed from the newly self-employed hardship fund. Applications are expected to be open on the 15th of June, and by tomorrow, I believe, I'm informed that there should be clear and concise instruction on how and where to complete applications in each local authority area.
Angus MacDonald.
Yeah, thank you very much. The Cabinet Secretary has covered my supplementary, so thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. MacDonald. Edward Mountain for supplementary.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I'd like to thank the Cabinet Secretary for responding to my campaign to support small B&Bs who don't pay business rates. Will he also support my campaign to get these small B&Bs 100% council tax relief because they won't benefit from the 100% business rates relief?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, the history of this is straightforward. I think that the initial grant support provided was to tourism businesses that paid business rates. And of course, many bed and breakfast businesses don't pay business rates, although living in their own house, as we all do, they pay council tax. So the gap was to fail to provide a grant assistance for those small businesses, namely bed and breakfasts, and those without business bank accounts. That gap we have now sought to fill, and therefore I believe that well, Mr. Mountain is shaking his head, we have actually filled that gap, but we don't grant relief for council tax for other business people who pay business rates. So I think it would be somewhat anomalous and a bit of a surprising commitment from the Scottish Conservative Party to grant personal relief for one group in society for council tax when other hard-working business people pay their own council tax. So no, I'm afraid, to be candid, I won't be supporting that campaign. I don't know how much it costs, nor whether it's an official Scottish Conservative campaign. I'll be interested to find that out later. But in the interim, I'm delighted that we have equalised the playing field by making available grant finance for hard-working businesses and bed and breakfast establishments throughout the country.